This episode is brought to you by our Patreon members.
Join our growing community for early access to every episode, exclusive video versions of the podcast, behind-the-scenes footage, full-length product demos, and more. We appreciate you. Welcome back to Martins and More. My name's Maury, and I'm here with Martin Insider, Spoon Phillips. Spoon, how you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm looking very forward to today's show with a very special guest, so it should be a lot of fun.
Very special guest, do tell.
Well, we have someone we have known for a long time, originally met through the Unofficial Martin Guitar Forum and the Martinfests festivals that we have attended over the years. Became a good pal, but he is a pretty amazing artist. He is a musician, but his main vocation is actually in Hollywood working on feature films. Academy Award winner, Tom Fleischman.
Hello, everyone.
He's in the building!
Tom, did you think we would already need edits at the first minute mark?
Well, you always have to cut the slate out. You know?
Fair enough.
I forgot to put the slate in. Right. See, we don't have that kind of stuff yet. That's
very
season
good.
7.
Yes. So Tom is a veteran, in fact, second generation Hollywood celebrity. I call him a celebrity because he's an Academy Award winner, nominated for multiple Academy Awards, have worked on some 240 film and television productions, if I'm up to date, and looking very forward to hearing about Tom's amazing career, as well as I'll start asking him some questions about guitars in a bit, probably as well. So welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you guys for inviting me. What I do is the title that I have in my credit on the movies is re-recording mixer. So, just that's and the Oscar I got was for best sound mixing.
Wow. Tell us about that.
For Hugo, for the film Hugo.
That's right, Hugo. Yes, I'm a longtime collaborator of Marty Scorsese. I've worked on most all of his movies since Raging Bull.
Wow.
And yeah, so it's been a long career. I suspect at my age it's probably close to being over, but I still enjoy it. You know, it's one of the blessings I've had in my life is that I've spent an entire career looking forward to going to work every morning. So that's,
excellent. And you know, I guess you just have to admit you're not 52 anymore, Tom. But happens to all of us eventually. Now, do I remember correctly that one of your first major projects was Reds, the Warren Beatty film?
Reds was the first film that I was nominated for an Oscar for Best Sound, yes. That was in 1980. I began my career, well, I guess I should go back further. As a child, I grew up in a filmmaking household. My mother was a quite well-known filmmaker. And by the way, you mentioned Hollywood, but I've worked and lived my entire life in New York.
Fair enough.
I have done a few projects out west. You know, a couple of films I've mixed out in Los Angeles, but for the most part, all of my work has been done here in New York. My mother was a very well-known film editor. Her name was Dee Dee Allen. She cut films that you've heard of: The Hustler, Bonnie and Clyde,
Wow,
Slaughterhouse 5, The Breakfast Club, Little Big Man. I mean, her career is amazing, was amazing. My father was a documentary filmmaker, producer, director, and writer. He worked for the networks in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. This was when there was in broadcasting, there was no internet and there was no cable TV. It was all over the airwaves. And so the government was controlling the airwaves, the Federal Communications Commission, and they had a policy called the Fairness Doctrine, which most people think said that if you presented one side of an argument, you had to present the other. But it was really more of a firewall between the news and the entertainment divisions of the networks. So in order to provide entertainment over the airwaves, the networks also had to provide programming in the public interest. And that was part of the news division. So my father worked for the news division of CBS and ABC back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and he produced hour-long documentaries on a variety of subjects. He used to travel all over the world. And that's that's the household I grew up in. So I knew probably by the time I was in high school, sophomore, junior in high school, that I was going to have a career in motion pictures. And I went to college. I graduated from high school and went to NYU Film School for 2 semesters, 1970, 71, and then I dropped out. It was a weird time because, when I was at NYU, Nixon had invaded Cambodia, was bombing Cambodia, and there was a big anti-war movement going on then. And so when I was a freshman in college at NYU, the entire student body went on student strike. And in the spring semester, I didn't go to any classes. I wound up getting 4 incompletes and an F, and I dropped out and got a job. I was looking for a job. It was summer of 1970. Yeah, summer of 1970. I'm looking for a job. I want to get a job in film editing. And there was nothing around. I couldn't find anything. One of my mother's assistants said that he knew a guy who was opening a little sound shop, and he was looking for help. So I said, okay. I met with the guy. He had a little office in the Brill Building on 49th Street, and he said he'd hire me for $90 a week off the books, and if I did well, he would give me a $10 raise every 3 months. So I said, okay, and I went to work for him, and basically, he had come from Israel and opened this business, and he did transfers. In those days, the sound was recorded on the set on 1/4-inch tape. And those tapes had to be transferred to 35 millimeter or 16 millimeter magnetic film in order to be put in sync with the picture. So all of it had to be transferred from 1/4-inch tape to 35 or 16 millimeter film. And that's what I did when I first got there. I was also selling sound effects. He had brought a big lot. He had gotten it at an auction, like boxes and boxes of 7-inch reels of sound effects, 1/4-inch tapes, and he didn't know what it was. And the first couple of months I worked for him, he sat me down in a little room with a tape recorder and a pair of headphones, and he said, listen to the tapes and just write down what's on each reel. Just write them, list all the sound effects that are on there. So that took me a couple of weeks at least, just to get through it, the first pass. And then he taught me how to splice the tape, and cut out the garbage, the slates, and anything that was no good, and keep the stuff that was usable, and keep a list of it. And then I would separate all these sound effects with white paper tape, and I categorized them. So I put all the cars together, I put all the dogs together, I put all the doors and all of the birds and the ambiances and the wind and the trains, and I tried to keep them all in categories. And it took probably 6 months. The first 6 months I worked for him, I was doing this. And at the time, he was also building a Foley studio. Foley is sound effects that are recorded to picture. You watch the picture and do the actions. It's like footsteps and actions of whatever's going on screen that would make a noise. If someone claps, or something like that.
Chewing granola.
Yeah. And so when I finished all this, I had a sound effects library. And this, the way it works is that the film is shot in a series of shots, and then it goes to the editing room and it's put together to make a story, to tell a story. When that editing is done and you have a coherent movie, it's not just a series of shots. The shots now line up to tell a story. It has to go. The sound is all bumpy. Like each camera angle is from a different angle, so the microphones are in a different place, and the backgrounds don't necessarily match. And so when they cut these pieces together, there are big bumps in them, and that all has to be eventually evened out. And there was a crew of sound editors, and they still are, that's what they do, to go through all of the sound that was recorded on the set and pick out the best recordings of each line of dialogue and build it into a cohesive, logical framework so that someone can come along and smooth out all the cuts and add the sound effects and add the music. And basically that final process is re-recording, and that's my job now. When I first started, I was just selling sound effects, but eventually I worked into the studio and started mixing. That's the short version of the first 20 years of my career.
Yeah, 20 years and 10 minutes.
You've gotten to work on some music projects, film or television music projects.
Oh, yeah.
There was, because I know you're a big music fan, so that must have been fun.
Yeah, obviously, Scorsese has produced a whole series of musical documentaries, starting with the blues, and I didn't actually do too much work on the blues because I was busy on something else at the time. But starting with Bob Dylan, No Direction Home, the George Harrison two-part series on George Harrison. There was a series on the Eagles.
Oh, yeah.
And that was, what's the guy's name? Anyway, I'm having a mental block about the producer's name. But he also did a show on Sinatra and on James Brown. And I did a HBO show, two-part series on Elvis Presley, which was a hell of a lot of fun. It was great.
I bet.
Really
Yeah,
amazing
I bet.
footage.
Is it cliche to ask you, is it different working on a program or a project that's centered around music? Is that different than doing something mostly dialogue and Foley?
Well, sure, it is different. I mean, a narrative feature film is quite different from a documentary, mainly because the main thing is the budget. We have much less time for a documentary. Usually it's much simpler. A feature film is very complex. There's all kinds of elements that go into the track. It's basically broken down into three food groups, we'll call it. Dialogue, music, and sound effects. And the dialogue has several subcategories. There's the production track, which is the track that's recorded on the set while the camera is rolling, which forms basically the foundation of everything else. And then if there's a problem with that track, if it's unusable for any reason, the dialogue can be replaced later in the studio. The actor comes back and re-records their lines, tries to match their performance. And that's done for several reasons. It could be a technical problem with the recording, could be unusable, or it could be an environmental problem where there's just too much noise on the set if it's outside and there's airplanes going over or something like that. And the story is supposed to take place in 1890 and you've got F-15s flying around. Obviously, that track is is not going to be too useful. So they get the actors to come back in. Also, performance issues. Director might not be happy with the performance on a particular line, or they want to change the line for exposition. Something's happened in the story and they need to make a change, and so they'll change it from St. Louis to Cincinnati or something like that. They have to get the actor to come back and re-loop that line and then fit it into their lips. So that's basically the dialogue, and then there's also background dialogue, which is they get a whole crowd of actors in the studio and record all the background people that you see behind the main action, all the extras. If you're in a restaurant, people are talking, so they will do recordings of those, and then if it's something that's really on camera and is visible, they'll try and fit something into those actors' voices, into their lips.
I could picture some actor coming into New York City on a cab and going up to the third floor and getting off the elevator and walking in Cincinnati. And then
basically, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, they'll have a whole list. They'll get the guys back in. They get very well paid to do that, by the way.
And it's not an easy thing. I mean, everything you're talking about is not an easy thing, and most people have no idea that much re-recording goes into just a typical scene in a feature film. Yeah. Not to mention actors have, like you said, having to match their performance. Have to come in cold.
Some actors are very good at that. Some, like Al Pacino's fantastic. He can do it. Others are just terrible. And if you have an actor who can match their performance in terms of the pitch, the energy, the timbre of what was happening when the film was shot, it's very easy to fit that in and make it invisible. The audience will never know that line was replaced. But some actors just have an inability to do that, and no amount of equalization or echo or reverb or whatever will enable you to make that seamless.
Yeah, right.
That's one of the things that I struggle with the most in mixing is dealing with, they call this ADR, automated dialogue replacement, with fitting ADR in. There's also sync issues. If the line has been changed, obviously it's never going to match their lips because they're saying something different. And that happens all the time. Those things, though, tend to go by pretty quick, and the audience doesn't always pick up on it. So that's dialogue. That's one of the triumvirate, dialogue, music, effects. Music, there's really basically two kinds of music in a film. There's score and there's source. Some people call it diegetic, which is a term I greatly object to. It's one of those things that's taught in film school, and it's source music. It's coming from a source in the scene.
Like the record player or the
like a record
clarinet.
player or a radio or something, blaring on the street, a car going by. It's source music. It's coming from a source. But for some reason they had to get fancy and call it diegetic sound.
Well, I have to ask you now because I don't know when I'll get the chance to do it again. When Blazing Saddles, when the sheriff's walking on the horse and you hear this big film score, and obviously it's a film score, but then they widen the shot and it reveals that the music's being played right there. The whole orchestra is in the shot.
Count Basie's orchestra was actually.
That doesn't happen. Yeah. That doesn't happen. In fact, when I first started dating my wife years ago. And I told her what I did. She said, "You mean they don't just have a microphone up there and all the sound happens?"
Like in 1924.
And I think a lot of audiences don't really realize what goes into it. Obviously, then the third element is sound effects, and there really is a wide range of sound effects, types of sound effects. A lot of them come out of a library, things like car actions, doors. You can pretty much look up anything in a sound effects library and you'll find a recording of it. The question is, will it fit the action that's being seen on screen? So there's a team of editors that will, the team led by a supervising sound editor who has to plot out and map out and decide with the director. They go through the whole film with the director and what kind of ambience do you want to hear in this scene, and what's the most important sound here, and so there's hard effects like cars and doors and dogs and things that you see in the picture that you expect to hear a sound from. And then there's ambient effects, which is just sort of general tone, whether it's room tone in a room or something going on in the street, traffic, horns, seagulls, birds, all those kind of ambient effects. And then there are design effects like monsters and spaceships and things that don't exist in reality that you've got to come up with a sound for. And so these are specialized skills that the sound editors have. There are Foley editors who do nothing but cut Foley, for years and years and years. And, they can make a career just cutting footsteps and actions of what's going on in the picture.
Huh.
And then at the end, after all of those things have been sourced and approved and put into sync with the picture, it finally gets to me. And it's my job to make a cohesive mess of all of that stuff. And basically tell the story of the movie, because now I'm in control of how loud the dialogue is going to be, how loud the music is going to be, how loud any particular sound effect is going to be. And I've got to go through and make the movie play. And, the whole idea of what I do is really about making my work invisible. I do not want the audience thinking about a particular sound effect or wondering why something's out of sync, or, all those things just have the instantly take the audience member out of the story, and they start thinking about the filmmaking. So what I'm trying to do when I sit there all day long, going back and forth over every single line of dialogue and every sound effect, is making it seem natural, so that the audience will just accept it as part of the reality that they're watching, the story that they're in. And that's really what it's all about.
Wow.
And whether it's a narrative feature, obviously a narrative feature is going to be a lot more complicated in those regards than a documentary. Basically, a documentary, you've got cinema verite footage, you've got interviews, on-camera interviews, what they call talking heads, and you have a narration, and you probably have sound effects and music as well. But it's usually much simpler, and I don't struggle as much with the sync material, the cinema verite material that's usually forgivable if it's if the microphones aren't in exactly the right position, and the sound is difficult to hear. We can get away with a lot more of that in a documentary than we can in a feature.
You talked about that it's your responsibility. You're in charge of deciding how loud the dialogue is in a movie. I can already think of a couple, but in general, would you agree some popular current movies, the dialogue's not loud enough, or is that me getting old?
Well, no, it's not you getting old. Technology is a double-edged sword. One thing is it's allowed filmmakers to do things in terms of sound that was never able to be done before. I'll go into a little brief history of cinema sound.
Yeah, please.
In the 1930s, sound was invented, and it was recorded on film, photographically recorded on film. The microphone would pick up the sound, and it would go into an amplifier, and the amplifier would drive a light source that was shining through a slit, and that the film would be moving past that slit, and so the variable light, which was caused by the waveform of the sound, would be photographically exposed on the film. And Up until, I would say, the early 70s, all films had optical tracks. The original recordings eventually became magnetic, and the mix materials all became magnetic film, which was a much better quality than optical film. But the limitation was that the final track that went with the picture was an optical track. They would take the mix and transfer it to an optical negative, which would be then printed on the film, which is basically just a photograph of the waveform, which ran down the edge of the film between the sprocket holes and the picture area. Mm-hmm. And this was very limited in terms of dynamic range, meaning the difference between the loudest sound and the softest sound in the film, this dynamic range. It was very limited because there was only so much room on that soundtrack area, so the amplitude of the signal could only go so high. Otherwise it would hit the end of the area and would get clipped. So you had to, the dynamic range had to be, and there was quite a bit of noise involved in the photographic, the optical track. Any kind of dirt would be picked up as noise. So the low stuff had to be louder, and the loud stuff had to be lower, which means that the whole dynamic range of the track would be compressed. This allowed for dialogue to be much more intelligible, because now, with the advent of digital recording, and everything is now digital, there's no more magnetic, there's no more film, it's all done in computers. And this has allowed multi-layered soundtracks. You can put many more sound effects in than you used to be able to. The dynamic range of the track can be much wider, so there can be a much bigger difference between the loudest thing and the softest thing. And the problem is that films have been traditionally mixed for the theater. In other words, a mixing room that I sit in when I'm working is designed to duplicate a theater. A large room where many people will sit together and watch the movie. And in that case, if everyone is sitting quietly and watching the movie and the popcorn noise isn't too loud, you can allow for a much wider dynamic range than you can, say, in your living room with the air conditioner on and the water boiling in the kitchen and the sirens going outside the window. There's much more noise in the environment when you're watching television. So the dynamic range has to be limited. And very often there's just no money in the budget to do that. So they'll just release the track that was made for the theater, put it on television, and there you are sitting in your couch and you're turning the volume of your television set up and down. The music comes in, you turn it down, and then the dialogue is too low, you turn it back up.
Yeah. Tom, I want to interject here because I have noticed I've never had the modern television surround sound stuff or even a sound bar, so I've never had a central channel, and as I've always just been hooked up to stereo speakers. And it seems like, and I wonder about that, if what I was hearing was I don't have a center channel, and so I'm not getting the dynamic that the mix of that particular Blu-ray or whatever was intended for. And I wondered if that's why I couldn't hear some things, or some things seemed too loud.
Yes, I'm sure that certainly plays into it. The films generally are mixed with a center channel. You have a center and you have a left and right, and sometimes you have a single surround channel, but nowadays, the surround channels are at least stereo, if not Atmos, which is, I don't think too many people have that in their house, but it does exist. And it's certainly a theatrical format where you've got speakers on the ceiling and a whole array of speakers around the room.
So how long ago was it that you went from like being an apprentice, or however you would call that, to being the only guy in the room?
Okay, well, that's an interesting thing, because that gets into the difference between the way this is done in New York and the way it was always traditionally done in Hollywood. in Hollywood, the final mix was done by traditionally, 3 mixers. One mixer would just deal with dialogue, one would deal just with music, and one would deal just with sound effects. And it developed that way because of originally when things were still on optical tracks, the whole reel, a 10-minute reel of the film was always broken up into a number of reels. Because so you could manage it, take it a piece at a time. But you would have to start at the beginning of the reel and record all the way through and mix everything in real time from beginning to end.
Oh.
You could not stop and back up and punch in and continue, pick up from where you left off. You couldn't do that. You had to record the whole thing. You could do 2 takes and splice it together at a certain point if that was, that was done sometimes. But generally the whole thing was done in 1 take. And they would rehearse all day. They would rehearse every fader move, and obviously the tracks were much, much less complicated then. You wouldn't have 15 or 16 dialogue tracks and hundreds of sound effects tracks. You had 10 sound effects and 2 music tracks and 5 or 6 dialogue tracks. That was it. So it was manageable, but that's the way it had to be done. So they would have 1 guy on each thing, and that's the way it traditionally developed, became a union requirement for a long time. In New York, it was different. We didn't have the manpower to do that. Generally in New York, the mixers worked alone and just mixed everything. And that's how I was trained. As I said, I started working in the sound effects house. I eventually moved to a larger facility that was doing mixing with my mentor, Dick Vorisek, was the best mixer in New York. And he was kind of the king of the hill here. And there was a number of directors that lived in New York, Sidney Lumet, Arthur Penn, and Woody Allen. Were all making films here in New York. So he had a clientele. And I started working for him in 1971, doing transfers. I just transferred dailies. The films would be shot on Monday. The 1/4-inch tapes that were recorded would go to the lab with the film, and then they would be delivered to the sound house where I worked, and I would transfer all the printed takes from 1/4-inch to 35 or 16 millimeter magnetic film, which was just 35 or 16 millimeter film with a magnetic oxide on it that you could record on. And we had these big dubbers that you put a reel of stock at the top and take up reel, and it would go through. There was a record head and a playback head, and you could transfer the sound from the 1/4-inch to the 35, and that allowed the editors to sync it up with the picture because their film was in 35, 16.
Oh, wow.
I did that for like 6 years on many movies. Yeah. And during that time, my mentor, Dick Vorisek, was mixing films down on the floor below. So, because I had grown up in this industry and my mother was so well known, and she was kind of a powerful thing in New York. She was, a powerful editor. So I kind of had a foot in the door there. I kind of got away with a lot of stuff other people probably wouldn't have gotten away with. I would get these long transfers. We used to transfer hour-long Bonanza episodes for the European market. And I would transfer from 1/4-inch to 16 millimeter. And I would get the thing going, and I'd get the transfer going, and then I would sneak out and run down into the mixing room and sit in the back and just watch what was going on. And they let me get away with that. There was a couple of people in that place who wanted me out, but I survived. And I did learn a lot doing that. I watched how the mixes would run, how Dick worked with the various elements, and it was a great start. And it's a couple of years later, the studio where I was working, I was doing these transfers, started offering mix time to film students. There was, NYU and Columbia and School of Visual Arts all had film programs for students in New York, and they all had to make student films. And all of those films had to be mixed. So my bosses were offering the schools, I would come in on Saturdays and Sundays and get paid my regular transfer scale and mix these student films for $25 an hour. Students would pay the studio $25 an hour. They'd pay me my regular mixing scale, and I would sit there on Saturdays and Sundays and mix these horrible films with terrible sound. But there were a couple of them that actually became successful filmmakers later on. Coen brothers, Joel
No
Coen
way.
was one of them. Yeah, I mixed a student film, and Nancy Savoca. Anyway, it was amazing training for me because I got to use the console. I was mixing. I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but I did it. I just did the best I could, and it was great training. Did that for about a year on weekends. It was great.
Wow. So I've got a very
and then-
serious question for you, and don't feel like you have to answer it on camera. If I were to connect you with this raw footage, which is 3 tracks of dialogue, 3 tracks of isolated video, and a 4th track that contains all of us, how many months would it take you to finish it, and would you need my help?
What would I be doing to it? Just
Every
Smoothing
time
it
one of us
out.
talks over the other, you got to take.
I would have to. I would
like
be doing the editing. The editing. I don't. Yeah, I could do it. Yeah, I don't know how long it would take.
Probably not that long. Can you tell us, do you have anything in the can, as they say, or anything coming up you're working on right
Well,
now?
I've been doing a couple of these projects. Jimmy Chin and Chai Vasarhelyi are these filmmakers who made Free Solo and The Rescue, about the Thailand cave rescue.
Oh yeah.
And I've been working with her for many years. She started out doing music documentaries, actually. And so I've just finished a couple of films for her and Jimmy. One of them been out a couple of months now, called Endurance, about Ernest Shackleton's expedition
Oh, wow.
to the South
Fascinating.
Pole. It's called Endurance. I think it's on National Geographic and Hulu or something. And I just finished a fascinating film that they did on this woman named Lindsay Addario, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times war photographer. So that'll be coming out fairly soon, I guess. We're just finishing up on that. And then they have another one I'll be doing, I guess, in April, about the Colombian kids who got caught in the plane crash in the mountains in Colombia, and they were in the jungle for 40 days. Excuse me.
Wow. Wow. Did you, I know it's been several years now, but did you see where they found Shackleton's Scotch whiskey hoard under a
Yes.
shed in Antarctica?
Yeah.
I didn't get to taste the real thing, but I did get a bottle of the Scotch that was they actually tested and identified where it came from and all that.
Oh, really?
And they tried to recreate it. Yeah, that was
I do
pretty,
remember. I remember
fascinating.
that story. Yeah, this is fascinating. It sort of goes back and forth. Shackleton had a crew, and on the crew was a photographer, and he had a 35 millimeter movie camera, and he was making films of the whole thing, and those were all recovered. So there's all this footage of the actual expedition, the ship crumbling and sinking, and the guys playing with the dogs and playing soccer on the ice, and then finally taking these boats across Antarctica to the sea and finding their way home.
Yeah, and they just found the ship. They just found the ship.
That's right.
Recently.
And this documentary is intercut between the original voyage and the voyage of them going to find the ship. So it's intercut between the two stories. It's fascinating. And one of the most interesting things about it was they had some interviews with some of the actual crew members. So they had recordings of their voices.
Wow.
Okay, and they had a recording of Shackleton's voice. And they got actors, sound-alikes, they also found the diaries of all the crew members. There was this treasure trove of diaries that they found, where they had all, kept diaries of everything that was done during the whole trip. And they had these actors read the diaries and then used AI to match these actors' voices to the actual recordings of the guys that they had.
Wow.
So it sounds like the guys are reading their own diaries. It's pretty amazing. Excuse me.
Wow.
It's really amazing.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's very cool. Very, very cool.
It is cool. Yeah.
So I need to ask you, this being Martin's and more, I think the last time I was up at your house, speaking of Scotch whiskey, there were you had a very nice small collection of really cool Martin guitars. I was just wondering, do you have time to play these days? Look at that. Speaking of malt whiskey, do you have?
I don't know that one. That looks.
That's Jura, yeah.
Thank you, Tony Phillips.
Yeah, we never had that one back in the day in our whiskey club.
I haven't tried that one.
Yeah, there's an Englishman lives in Cornwall, brought it over to the Martinfests a couple of years ago, and so it's become popular. But do you still have your OM45 marquee? I'm not OM45, OM28 marquee.
I have an OM28 marquee.
Yeah.
I do still have that.
Yeah.
I have my 1951 0018, which I love. It's my favorite.
Ooh.
That's my birth year guitar.
And when did you get that, actually? When did you actually acquire that?
I got that, my dad bought that for me on my 60th birthday.
Oh, that's excellent. I forgot about that. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Well, you have the best OM28 marquee that I've ever heard. I always remember it very fondly. So it's quite
it's a beauty. And it's got the neck. The neck just feels so good. I've never felt a neck so comfortable.
Did you still have, or did you have a custom shop 21 something, CS 2111?
I have a CS 0014. I think it's I'm trying to remember what it is. 0013. I think it's a 2013 custom shop thing. It's a small body.
I have this memory of you and I at the Martin factory, and it was a custom shop dash something, and that's where the memory bank
CS-00-13 or 14, I think.
Do you still have that?
Well, that means you haven't played it in a while. So
I haven't heard it in a while. It's been in its case. I take care of it, but I haven't played it much. I think it has an issue. I think I have to get it in for some technical assistance. I also have a very nice OM35 with a sunburst.
Ooh.
Yeah. What else do I have? I have a HD 35, which I love.
Excellent.
I think those are all the Martins. Oh no, I have an SM15S mahogany.
0015 SM?
The SM.
50,
yes.
Yeah.
So the one guitar that I got from you, Maury, that I sold to Jim Kalika was the Maury Muehlhausen one that Mary commissioned. Yeah, it was just too big for me, and I had a 12-string, the jumbo, grand jumbo 12-string that.
Okay.
That one
Like
went
Marshalls?
to Ed Madonia.
Oh, wow.
Like he needs another one.
Ed's got that one.
Now he has
He
100.
always needs another one. I don't know if you were hoodwinked or if you've heard this, but we have a game that we play on Martins and More called 20 Questions, where typically one of us, either the smart guy who is Maury or the wise guy who is Spoon, thinks of a Martin guitar, and the other one has 20 questions to guess what Martin guitar they're thinking of, and you can guess up to 3 models, and it has to be a Martin guitar that's available today. And was wondering if you would be willing to undergo the ordeal of 20 questions.
That's a good
Do
way
I have
say
to
it.
ask the 20 questions?
We could give you the option of you pick the guitar. It's got to be something that's in the catalog today, and or we could pick the guitar, but it'll be a relatively softball.
Okay, so how does it
Guitar.
work then? Let's say you think of a guitar.
You get 20 yes or no questions. 3 of those are allowed to be models, and if you run out of the model names, then you get the big. But so.
So one popular first question is this guitar made in Nazareth? If we say no, then you have 19
know it's
questions
in-
left. You know it's a Mexico model. And then, but we have to say yes or no to
Yeah,
your question.
but I'm not all that familiar with all the different models. And the
Like I say,
different
it'll be
woods.
relatively softball. We're not going to give you one of the oddball,
All right, I'll give it a try.
limited edition Joe's Plumbing Supply model or anything like that. But okay, well, I am thinking of a Martin guitar, and you have 20 questions in which to guess the Martin model that is available for sale today and we're not going to fool you by bringing in 2025 specs or anything like that aren't coming out until next week or anything like that. So 20 questions are on the clock with Tom now.
Okay, 1, is it made in Nazareth?
Yes, it is made in Nazareth. That's one question.
And I could
Is
be
it
a
a
coach
dre-
on your team if you have a question.
Okay, is it a dreadnought?
2, that's a yes. Uh-oh. Zooming in, zeroing
It's
in.
a dreadnought. Is it, let's see, let me think of a good question. Does it have an ivoroid binding on the neck?
It does not have an ivoroid binding on the neck. That's a no.
Is it a 6-string?
It is a 6-string.
So it's a D something. It's not a D35. Let's see, what else can I ask? Is it all mahogany?
It is not. Great question. That's a no.
Okay, so it's got either rosewood or some other kind of wood for back and sides. And obviously,
Well, you said all mahogany. That would imply the top, so it's not all mahogany.
yes, it's not all mahogany. It could have a mahogany back and sides. So is the how many have I done? I've done 6. Okay,
5.
is it a D28?
It is a D28.
Is that it? Do I get it?
That's
Wow,
it.
is
You
that it?
actually got it.
Wow.
The
supposed
fist
to be
bump.
that good
Went
at
over
this
the
that
camera
early.
is fist bump.
Yes. Wow.
Yes, the D28 just came out for 2025 with scalloped bracing. It's the first time that they've used the moniker D28. Still has the 1950s dots, but they've gone to scallop bracing, so it no longer has straight bracing. So a big change.
So it has the
for
scallop
D28.
bracing, but not the herringbone trim.
That's correct. The herringbone with the
It's not an
1930s.
HD28.
Yeah, but the HD28 still has the herringbone and still has the diamonds, and so they're just. So that was a big surprise for a lot of people. They're coming out at the NAMM show next week, so So they've already been announced. They announced them yesterday. So we're allowed to talk about them. Actually, this is not going to shoot until after the NAMM shows anyway. We're not going to air this until after the NAMM show anyway, probably. So.
We are from the future,
But,
Tom.
yes, that's right. Well, good. So
That was awesome.
yeah, it is. Our time is running out. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time and some fascinating information about, first of all, about the history of sound on film. I think there's an awful lot of people who've never heard anything like that. So let alone the fact that you have to do so much work just to make an episode of Boardwalk Jungle or whatever, seem totally natural without anybody noticing all the work you put into it. Or Boardwalk Empire, actually, because you actually worked on Boardwalk Empire.
Boardwalk Empire, 5 seasons.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I just, so you know, the nominations for Oscars were Reds, Silence of the Lambs,
Ooh.
Gangs of New York,
Ooh.
The Departed,
You were on The Departed.
and Hugo.
And Hugo.
Wow.
I finally won the one on Hugo. The others all went to other
That's right. We were watching. Very proud of you. It was a proud moment for everybody who knows you. So
Hell yeah.
Also have 6 Emmys and 7 CAS, which is a Cinema Audio Society. So I got a bunch of trophies in there, and I don't know what my kids are going to do with them when I go, but
parfait.
You wanna hang with
Parfaits. I
us?
hear they're good for parfaits.
Well, I want to ask you something on behalf of our viewers and our listeners. If they want to
Sure.
go and do a deep dive on Tom Fleischman, what are some of the most music examples of, they want to see you and they want to find an example of, he did that and it's got guitar in it?
Okay. Probably Neil Young, Heart of Gold.
That's an awesome one. Wow.
Jonathan Demme's film, a concert film at the Ryman with Neil and all of his band and family, and they do all the songs from Prairie Wind.
Seen it a few times. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That
excellent.
one,
And
or
No
the-
Direction
or
Home. I mean, come on.
No Direction Home. George Harrison. I remember what the
George-
title
yeah.
of that was.
Living in the
Remember the
no, it's I can't remember what it's called now either. Living in the Material World. No, I can't remember what
Living
it's
in the
been called.
Material World. Yes,
Yeah,
the
that's what it is.
title, yes.
Wow.
Or the Eagles. History of the Eagles. That's a good one
Yeah.
too.
See?
They all have guitars in them.
Yeah,
Right on.
indeed, and well mixed.
Yes.
How about it?
Yes.
Excellent.
And if you're interested in finding out what I've done in my career, you can look me up on imdb.com, Internet Movie Database. And it
It
lists
now
all of
requires a
them.
membership, but it's free. So
No,
you
it's
have to-
free. It's free. You just
Yeah.
go to imdb.com and type Tom Fleischman in the search, and it'll all come up. Let's see.
And then what's the delay? How long until this program shows up there?
I don't know. I don't know. With this program, I don't
end
think
up
they
on your
have
credits.
podcasts.
It can end up on your credits. That's right.
An otherwise very proud career besides this moment right now. But we want to thank you so much for, I couldn't believe when you said yes. I'm really honored to have you as a friend, and even more so to have you take some time on a busy day to talk to us. And I know it's so much easier to say, oh yeah, I've seen that podcast, we'll do it sometime, and never make the effort. But we both want to say thank you. This is really
No, it's
super
my
cool.
pleasure. I like doing this kind of thing because not enough people know what goes into it.
For sure.
It's
That's
it's-
definite.
I think it's interesting to some people.
Oh yeah, it sure is. So we're gonna do something creative here. Last week we had Taya Gherkin and Doug Young. Whenever there are 3 people, we're gonna sign off by saying, from all of us at Martins and More,
Thanks for listening.
Hear you later.